The air inside the main office of Blackwood Preparatory Academy smelled of lemon polish and old money. It was a sterile, cloying scent that seemed designed to suffocate the scent of anything lesser, anything that smelled of rain-damp wool coats or the lingering aroma of a city bus. Elias stood on the Persian rug, a small worn island in an ocean of gleaming mahogany, and felt the familiar chill of exclusion settle into his bones. It was a cold he knew intimately, a phantom limb of a life he had purposefully amputated. He held his daughter's hand, her small fingers a warm, trusting anchor in the glacial reception area. "I'm sorry," the woman behind the desk said, though her voice contained no actual sorrow. It was a crisp, efficient tool, as polished and impersonal as the desk she sat behind. Her nameplate read, Eleanor Vance, an irony so bitter it almost made him smile. "As I explained, tuition is only one part of the financial commitment. The new Family Endowment is non-negotiable. It ensures the continued excellence of Blackwood." Elias said nothing. He looked past her, through the beveled glass doors behind her, into a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men, founders, and benefactors whose names were etched in brass plaques beneath their likenesses. He had once been a man who could have had his portrait on such a wall. He had been a man who wrote the checks that made excellence continue. Now he was a man in a fraying coat, his bank account a carefully managed trickle, his entire existence a practice in invisibility. He felt a small tug on his hand. Lily, his daughter, looked up at him, her wide brown eyes reflecting the cold, artificial light of the chandelier overhead. She was 7 years old, a universe of impossible brightness crammed into a small body. She did not seem intimidated by the grandeur or the coldness. She was simply curious, her head tilted as she took in the woman with the severe hair and the dismissive tone. "Is this the only school?" Lily whispered, her voice a tiny thread of sound that was immediately swallowed by the opulent silence. The question was a clean, sharp blade to his heart. He had failed her. This was the thought that had become the background radiation of his life. He had built an empire of glass and steel, a monument to his own intellect and ambition, and when it had crumbled, it had buried the best parts of him in its rubble. All he had managed to save was Lily, and now he couldn't even give her this. He couldn't give her a chance to walk these polished halls, to learn from the best, to be shielded from the hard edges of the world he now inhabited. The woman, Eleanor, cleared her throat, a sound like gravel being stirred. "If you are unable to meet the requirements, the public school in the lower district has open enrollment." Her words were not a suggestion, they were a dismissal. And ushering towards the door, back to the world of rain-damp coats and bus fumes where people like him belonged. Elias felt a surge of something hot and old in his chest. An echo of the man he used to be. The man who would have bought this school on a whim and fired this woman for her impertinence. The man who would have crushed Headmaster Alistair Finch's smarmy, self-satisfied world for the simple pleasure of it. But that man was a ghost, a story he no longer told. To summon him now would be to risk everything, to expose the fragile peace he had built in the ruins. So he did what he had learned to do. He said nothing. He squeezed Lily's hand, a silent signal. He turned, his worn boots making no sound on the thick rug, and walked away. He did not look back at the woman or the portraits or the gleaming wood. He walked out of the heavy oak doors, back into the crisp autumn air, the scent of dying leaves, a welcome relief from the sterile perfume of wealth. They walked down the long, winding drive, past manicured lawns that were an almost violent shade of green. Luxury cars whispered past them, their occupants invisible behind tinted windows. Each one felt like a small judgment. Elias kept his gaze fixed forward, his jaw tight. He was a man in stasis, a wounded animal hiding in a shabby burrow, and he had just been reminded of the hunters who owned the forest. His apartment was on the third floor of a walk-up in the lower district, the very place the woman in the office had so casually consigned them to. It was small, 2 rooms that smelled of old wood and whatever Lily had been painting that morning. But it was clean, and it was theirs. He had scrubbed the floors himself, patched the plaster, and fixed the leaky faucet with a precision that was the last remnant of his engineering background. It was a fortress built of anonymity, a penance for past sins. He owned very few things from his old life: a set of worn, leather-bound books on philosophy and architecture, a simple, elegant wristwatch of Swiss design, its face cracked, which he kept in a drawer, and Lily. She was the one precious thing he had carried from the fire. That evening, after a simple dinner of soup and bread, he sat with Lily at their small kitchen table. He was trying to help her with a puzzle, a complex landscape of a European castle, but his mind was still back in that office. He could feel the texture of the Persian rug under his feet, hear the condescending tone in Eleanor Vance's voice. He was consumed by a bitter, impotent rage. Lily placed a puzzle piece, a small sliver of blue sky, into its rightful place. She did not look at him. "It's okay, Daddy," she said softly. Elias blinked, pulled from his reverie. "What's okay, sweetheart?" "The school," she said, her focus still on the puzzle. "It was too shiny. And that lady's hair looked like a helmet." A genuine laugh escaped him, a rusty, unfamiliar sound. It felt good. It did, didn't it? "We don't need that school," she continued, now looking up at him, her expression serious. "We can make our own." He smiled, a sad, tired expression. If only it were that simple, Lilybug. She hopped off her chair and ran to the small collection of art supplies they kept in a shoebox. She returned with a piece of construction paper and a box of crayons. She began to draw with a fierce concentration. Elias watched her, the anger inside him slowly receding, replaced by a wave of love so profound it was almost painful. She was his entire world, the reason he endured this diminished life. After a few minutes, she pushed the paper across the table. It was a child's drawing, full of crooked lines and impossible colors. It showed a building with a bright red door and huge windows. 2 stick figures stood outside, a tall one and a small one, both with giant smiling faces. Above the building, in wobbly letters, she had written, "Lily and Daddy's School." He looked at the drawing, at the simple, pure hope it represented. And for the first time in years, the walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart felt a tremor. This piece of paper was not a child's fantasy. It was a challenge. It was a reminder that he was not just a victim of his past, but a father with a future to build. He had been so focused on hiding from the world that he had forgotten how to build anything in it. That night, after Lily was asleep, her small form a peaceful lump under a threadbare quilt, Elias sat in the dark. He pulled out the cracked wristwatch from his drawer. It was a Patek Philippe, a gift to himself after his first billion-dollar acquisition. It no longer worked, but he kept it as a reminder of what he was capable of and what it had cost him. He thought about Lily's drawing. We can make our own. The sheer, unadulterated optimism of it. She didn't see the obstacles. She didn't see the endowment fees, or the dismissive secretaries, or the ghosts of his past. She just saw a problem and a solution. Build a better thing. He opened his old encrypted laptop. It was a relic, but it was firewalled and untraceable. He navigated through layers of security to a single dormant account. It was his doomsday fund, the one thing his former partner, Marcus Thorne, hadn't been able to find. It wasn't much, a fraction of his former wealth, but it was enough to disappear on. He had been guarding it, using it sparingly, making it last. He had seen it as an escape hatch. But looking at Lily's drawing, taped now to the wall above the laptop, he saw it differently. It wasn't an escape hatch. It was a seed. He browsed the local town news, something he rarely did. He saw an article about a fundraiser for the Northwood Community Center, the one that ran the after-school programs for the public school kids. They were trying to raise money for a new library. They were woefully short of their goal. He saw the face of the woman leading the charge, a teacher named Sarah Jenkins. Her expression was earnest, hopeful, and a little tired. He looked at the donation page. The amounts were small. $20, $50, $100. He thought about the non-negotiable endowment at Blackwood. He thought about the portraits on the wall. He thought about building something. He made a choice. It was a small one, a quiet rebellion in the dark of his tiny apartment. Using a complex series of proxies and anonymous transfers, he made a donation. $5,000. It was a significant chunk of his remaining funds. A reckless, impulsive act. It was the first decision he had made in 5 years that wasn't driven by fear. It felt like a deep, cleansing breath. He closed the laptop, the anonymous donation a single, defiant pixel glowing in the vast darkness of the internet. He didn't know what would happen, but he knew he could no longer stand still. He had to start building again, even if he had to start with a single, invisible brick. The next day, Elias felt a subtle shift in the air. The gray sky seemed less oppressive. The bitterness that usually coated his tongue was fainter. He took Lily to the park, and instead of sitting on the bench lost in his own bleak thoughts, he pushed her on the swings. He pushed her higher and higher, her laughter pealing through the crisp air like bells, and for a moment, he felt the simple, uncomplicated joy of it. A week later, he saw another article about the community center. The anonymous $5,000 donation had revitalized their campaign. It had been a catalyst, inspiring a new wave of smaller donations from the community. They were still short, but there was a new energy, a new hope. The article quoted the teacher, Sarah Jenkins, again. "This wasn't just a donation," she said. "It was a statement. It was someone saying they believe in these kids as much as we do." Elias read the words and felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. A statement. He hadn't thought of it that way. He had just been lashing out. A small act of defiance. But she was right. It was a statement against the world of Blackwood Academy. Against the idea that a child's worth was measured by their family's ability to endow a new wing. He found himself drawn to the community center. He started attending the town hall meetings about the library project, sitting in the back, just listening. He was a ghost at the feast, observing the messy, passionate, and deeply human process of a community trying to better itself. It was there that he saw her in person for the first time. Sarah Jenkins. She was even more compelling than her picture in the paper. She had a fire in her eyes, a passion that radiated from her as she argued for zoning variances and construction permits. She spoke not in the polished corporate jargon he was used to, but with a raw, heartfelt eloquence that moved the room. She was fighting for her students, for her community, and she was doing it with a budget that was probably less than Blackwood's monthly landscaping bill. He watched as she was stonewalled by bureaucratic red tape, her proposals picked apart by a councilman who clearly had ties to other interests. Elias recognized the tactics immediately. It was the slow, grinding death by 1,000 procedural cuts, a way to exhaust an opponent without ever landing a direct blow. He had used the same strategy himself a dozen times in boardrooms and negotiations. Seeing it used against someone so fundamentally good made him sick. After one particularly grueling meeting, where Sarah's proposal for a state grant was tabled indefinitely, Elias saw her outside, slumping onto a bench, the picture of dejection. The fire he had seen earlier was reduced to embers. He almost kept walking. The old instinct screamed at him, "Stay invisible. Do not engage." Do not get involved. But then he thought of Lily's drawing. He thought of the anonymous donation. He had already taken a step. He couldn't go back to just hiding. He walked over and sat on the other end of the bench. "They're giving you the runaround," he said, his voice quiet. Sarah looked up, startled. She saw a man with tired eyes and a kind face, dressed in simple, worn clothes. "I'm sorry?" "The councilman, Henderson," Elias clarified, nodding back towards the town hall. "He's not tabling your grant proposal because of the environmental impact study. He's tabling it because his brother-in-law owns the construction firm that has the exclusive contract for all municipal projects over $50,000, and your proposal uses a different, more affordable contractor." Sarah stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. How do you know that?" Elias shrugged. "Public records. It's all there if you know where to look. It's a common tactic. You've been focusing on the merits of your project. You need to focus on the politics of the room." He spent the next 20 minutes breaking down the council's power dynamics, the hidden allegiances, the personal vendettas. He spoke with a clinical precision that was startlingly at odds with his appearance. He laid out a strategy for her, a way to reframe her proposal that would bypass Henderson's influence and appeal directly to the interests of the other council members. When he was done, Sarah was looking at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Who are you?" "Just someone who used to work in an office," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "My name is Ben." It was the name on his fake documents, a name that felt like a stranger's coat. "Well, Ben," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, reigniting the fire in her eyes. "You've just given me more in 20 minutes than I've gotten from my own advisors in 6 months. Thank you." That was the beginning. Elias, or Ben, became a quiet, unofficial part of her team. He never attended the meetings with her, but they would meet on the park bench or at a quiet corner of the local diner. He helped her redraft the grant proposal, his fingers flying across the library's public computer keyboard with a speed and fluency that was mesmerizing. He structured the financial projections, embedded clauses that created leverage, and wrote an executive summary so compelling and clear it was a work of art. "Where did you learn to do this?" Sarah asked one afternoon, looking over the finished document. This is brilliant. It's better than the one the professional firm we hired last year wrote." "I read a lot," he mumbled, deflecting. The truth was, he had written dozens of documents like this, documents that secured billions in funding, that launched companies, that reshaped industries. This little grant proposal was like a master watchmaker fixing a child's toy. Their relationship deepened beyond the library project. He introduced her to Lily. The two of them hit it off instantly. Sarah had a natural warmth that drew Lily in, and Lily, with her unfiltered honesty, seemed to charm Sarah completely. They spent a Saturday at the park, all three of them. It felt dangerously like a family. "Daddy's really smart," Lily told Sarah as they sat on a blanket, eating sandwiches. "He knows all the names of the buildings downtown. He told me which ones have good bones and which ones are just pretty on the outside." Elias froze, a sandwich halfway to his mouth. He saw Sarah shoot him a curious look. "Is that right?" Sarah asked him, a playful glint in her eye. "What are good bones, Ben?" It's about the foundation," Elias stammered, feeling exposed. "The structure, the things you don't see that hold everything up." He was talking about buildings, but he knew he was also talking about himself, about the hidden framework of his past that supported his shabby present. The grant was approved. Sarah called him, her voice ecstatic. They loved it. They said it was the most professional and well-thought-out proposal they'd seen in years. "We did it, Ben. We actually did it." That evening, to celebrate, she invited him and Lily over for dinner. Her house was small and cluttered with books and student art projects, but it was warm and full of life. It felt like a home. After they put a very happy and very tired Lily to bed on the sofa, they sat on the porch, drinking tea. The night was quiet, the air cool. The elation of the day had settled into a comfortable peace. "Thank you, Ben," Sarah said softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You did all the work," he said. "I just helped with some paperwork." "No," she insisted, turning to look at him. "It was more than that. You gave me a map. You gave me hope when I was ready to give up." She paused, her expression turning serious. "There's more to you than you let on, isn't there? The man who works odd jobs and lives in the apartment on Elm Street. He's not the same man who can dissect a city council's political structure and write a grant proposal that can beat a professional firm." Elias looked away, out into the darkness. He knew this moment was coming. He could lie, deflect again, keep the walls up. But looking at her honest open face, he felt the walls beginning to crumble on their own. He was tired of hiding. He was tired of being Ben. "I used to be someone else," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I built a company, a big one. I had a partner. I trusted him. More than anyone. He was like a brother to me." He told her a piece of the story, the sanitized version. He told her about the betrayal, about how his partner had maneuvered him out, taken everything he had built. He told her about losing his reputation, his money, his name. He left out the name of the company, Titan Capital. He left out the name of the partner, Marcus Thorne, and he left out the sheer, staggering scale of it all. He painted himself as a small businessman who had been swindled, not a deposed king. "He took it all," Elias finished, his voice thick with a pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Everything I had worked for. He left me with nothing." Sarah didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat with him in the quiet darkness. He braced himself for the judgment, the pity, the questions. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand on his. Her touch was warm, firm. "Not nothing," she said softly. "He didn't take Lily, and he didn't take the man who knows how to build things with good bones." He looked at her, and in the dim light of the porch, he saw not pity, but understanding, acceptance. For the first time in 5 years, he felt seen. Not as the ghost of Elias Vance, or the shabby anonymity of Ben, but as the man sitting right there on her porch. And in that moment, under the quiet stars, a fragile, terrifying hope began to take root in the barren soil of his heart. He was beginning to feel like he could build again. Life settled into a new rhythm, one marked by a cautious optimism. Elias, or Ben, as the world knew him, continued his quiet existence, but it was no longer a solitary one. He was part of a trio now. He, Sarah, and Lily became a familiar sight at the farmer's market, at the park, in the aisles of the grocery store. He was falling in love, a slow, terrifying, and undeniable process. He was falling for Sarah's fierce intelligence, her unwavering decency, her easy laughter. And through her eyes, he was starting to see a different version of himself. Not a failure in hiding, but a man of quiet strength, a devoted father, a brilliant mind choosing a simpler path. The library project was moving forward, a tangible symbol of their shared efforts. Blueprints were being drawn up, contractors consulted. Elias found himself irresistibly drawn into the process, offering quiet suggestions on structural design and material sourcing that invariably saved money and improved the final product. He was a ghost architect, his expertise flowing anonymously into the project he had helped birth. This fragile piece, however, was built on a lie of omission. Every time Sarah called him Ben, every time she praised his hidden talents, a knot of guilt tightened in his stomach. He had told her a version of the truth, but the scale of what he was hiding was a chasm. He wasn't a swindled small businessman. He was a titan who had fallen from a great height, and the man who had pushed him was still out there, casting a long and terrible shadow. The shadow found him at a town council meeting in late October. It was a dry procedural affair concerning budget allocations for the following year. Sarah was there to present the final budget for the library, a formality before the funds were released. Elias sat in his usual spot in the back row, a silent guardian. The meeting was droning on when the final agenda item was announced: a special presentation by Headmaster Alistair Finch of Blackwood Preparatory Academy. Elias's body went rigid. Finch strode to the podium, oozing the same smug self-satisfaction he had projected for years. He was there, he announced, to speak against the town's proposed funding increase for the public school system. While the endeavors of our public education system are admirable, Finch began, his tone dripping with condescension, we must be realistic. We must ask ourselves if it is a prudent use of taxpayer funds to pour money into a system with such limited returns, when private institutions like Blackwood are achieving world-class results through philanthropic partnership. Elias felt his hands clench into fists. He could feel Sarah, a few rows ahead, stiffen with indignation. Finch continued, his voice swelling. In fact, I am thrilled to announce a new such partnership. A visionary leader in the financial world has seen the potential in Blackwood. His generosity will fund a new, state-of-the-art arts and humanities center on our campus. This is a man who understands that investing in excellence is the only investment that truly pays dividends. Elias felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. He knew what was coming. This visionary, Finch boomed, beaming at the small crowd, is a man I am proud to call a friend and a new board member of Blackwood Academy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the incredible generosity of Mr. Marcus Thorne. The name hit Elias like a physical blow. The air rushed from his lungs. Marcus Thorne, here, in this small town. The architect of his ruin, the brother who had driven the knife into his back, was now playing philanthropist at the very institution that had rejected his daughter. The universe, it seemed, had a sick, cruel sense of humor. The room was a blur. The sounds of polite applause were a roaring in his ears. He saw Finch shaking hands with someone in the front row, a man in a tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Elias didn't need to see his face. He knew that posture. He knew that aura of predatory confidence. His past and present had just collided with the force of a supernova. He was vaguely aware of Sarah turning in her seat, her eyes searching the crowd for him. She must have seen his face. The blood had drained from it, the carefully constructed mask of Ben shattering into a million pieces, revealing the raw, haunted face of Eleanor Vance beneath. Her brow furrowed in confusion and concern. The meeting ended. Elias felt bolted to his chair, his mind a maelstrom of shock and rage. He had to get out. He stood up on shaky legs and moved toward the exit, needing air, needing to escape the closing walls of the room. Ben! Sarah's voice cut through the fog. She caught up to him in the hallway, her hand on his arm. Ben, what is it? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. He couldn't look at her. I have to go. No, wait, she insisted, her grip tightening. Talk to me. When Finch said that name, Thorne, your face, I've never seen you look like that. Who is Marcus Thorne? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. This was it. The point of no return. He could feel the lie, the big, beautiful, fragile lie of his new life, fracturing under the weight of that one name. He looked into her eyes, her honest, trusting eyes, and he knew he couldn't lie to her any more. Not about this. He led her outside, away from the lingering crowd, to a quiet corner of the parking lot under the weak orange glow of a streetlight. The autumn air was cold, but he was burning up from the inside. My name is not Ben, he said, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. Sarah took a step back, her hand falling from his arm. Confusion warred with hurt in her expression. What are you talking about? Marcus Thorne, he said, the name a curse on his lips. He was my partner, the one I told you about, the one who took everything. He finally looked at her, forcing her to see the full, unvarnished truth in his eyes. He didn't just swindle a small businessman, Sarah. My company was Titan Capital. We managed billions of dollars. And my real name is Elias Vance. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stared at him, her face a pale mask in the dim light. He could see her mind working, recalibrating everything. The quiet man in the worn coat, the brilliant grant proposal, the encyclopedic knowledge of buildings and finance. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture she had never imagined. Elias Vance, she whispered, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. The Elias Vance, the one who disappeared, the one they said was a criminal, the one Thorne framed for the crimes he himself committed. Elias corrected, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He orchestrated a hostile takeover, used shell corporations to bury me in debt, and leaked false documents to the SEC. He wiped me out, legally, financially, publicly. I lost everything. My name, my reputation, my fortune. All I had left was a hidden emergency fund and my daughter. He had expected shock, anger. He had not expected the profound sense of betrayal that radiated from her. It was a cold wave that washed over him, more chilling than the night air. So everything, all of it, has been a lie, she said, her voice trembling. Ben, the man who works odd jobs. You let me believe. You let me. She couldn't finish the sentence. I had to disappear, he tried to explain, his voice pleading, to protect Lily, to protect myself. I never meant to deceive you. Didn't you? She shot back, her voice gaining a sharp, wounded edge. You let me fall for a ghost, Elias, or Ben, or whoever you are. You let me bring you into my life, into Lily's life, all while you were hiding this empire of secrets. I defended you to my friends. I told them you were this simple, good man who had been wronged. Was any of it real? Us, he said desperately, taking a step toward her. What we have. That's real. Is it? She asked, and the genuine doubt in her voice was the most painful blow of all. How can I know? The man I thought I knew doesn't even exist. I don't know you. I know a character you've been playing. A very convincing one, I'll admit. Her words were like stones, each one finding its mark. He had thought the truth would be a relief. Instead, it was a weapon that was being turned against him, wielded by the person he cared for most. Sarah, please. No, she said, holding up a hand, her entire body language a wall he could not breach. I need to think. I need you to leave. Leave? The word was a punch to the gut. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Just go. She turned and walked away from him, her back rigid, not looking back. He stood alone in the parking lot, under the cold, indifferent light, the name of his destroyer echoing in his ears. He had just confessed the deepest truth of his life, and it had cost him everything he had just begun to build. The rejection was absolute, a final damning verdict. He was Elias Vance, the fallen Titan, and he was utterly, completely alone. The walk home was a blur of streetlights and shadows. Elias felt nothing. It was a terrifying, hollow numbness, the kind that comes after a catastrophic injury before the real pain sets in. He had survived the collapse of his empire, the public disgrace, the lonely years in hiding. He had endured it all by building a fortress of apathy around his heart. Sarah and Lily had breached that fortress. They had shown him sunlight and warmth, and he had foolishly let himself believe he could live in it. Now the walls were not just rebuilt, they were sealed. The mortar mixed with the fresh, searing pain of Sarah's rejection. He let himself into the apartment. It was quiet. Lily was at a friend's house for a sleepover, a small mercy he didn't deserve. The silence was immense, suffocating. He walked through the 2 small rooms that had started to feel like a home and now felt like a prison cell. He saw the book Sarah had loaned him on the nightstand. He saw the small clay pot Lily had painted for him on the windowsill. Each object was a fresh torment. The old cynicism, the one that had been his only companion for so long, returned with a vengeance. It whispered in his ear, its voice familiar and grimly comforting. "See? This is what happens when you trust. This is what happens when you hope. You were right all along. The world is a machine of power and betrayal, and love is just a weakness it exploits. You tried to be Ben, the simple man. But the world only respects Elias Vance, the monster, and it destroys him all the same." He went to the closet and pulled down a dusty duffel bag. The action was automatic, a programmed response to catastrophic failure. Run. Disappear. Start over. It was the only strategy he had left. He began to pack, his movements stiff and mechanical. A few changes of clothes, the leather-bound books. He opened the drawer to retrieve the cracked watch and saw Lily's drawing of their school, still taped to the wall. Lily and Daddy's school. He ripped it from the wall, the paper tearing slightly. He couldn't bear to look at it, at the monument to his own foolish, fleeting hope. He was a contagion. He had brought the chaos of his old life into the quiet, orderly world of Sarah Jenkins, and it had broken her. He had exposed his daughter to the aftershocks of a war he thought he had escaped. The only way to protect them now was to do what he should have done from the beginning: vanish completely. He would take Lily, find a new town, a new name, and build thicker walls. He would teach her the lesson he had learned so painfully: never let anyone in. His internal collapse was total. The man who had stood up to corporate raiders and government investigators was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of fear and self-loathing. He had failed as Elias Vance, the titan of industry. He had failed as Ben, the simple man. And now, he was failing as a father, as a partner, as a human being. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He sat on the edge of his bed, the half-packed bag at his feet, and surrendered to it. He had nothing left to fight with. The morning light, when it came, was gray and unforgiving. It filtered through the grimy window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air of his failed life. He hadn't slept. He had just sat there, letting the hours and the despair wash over him. He had a single clear thought. He had to get Lily and be gone before Sarah could tell anyone, before Thorne could somehow find out he was here. The paranoia was a living thing, coiling in his gut. He was about to stand up, to begin the final grim logistics of his escape, when his phone buzzed. It was a news alert, a local one he had subscribed to when he was tracking the library project. He almost ignored it. But the headline caught his eye. Blackwood Academy to dedicate new Thorne Arts Center in surprise ceremony today. Below the headline was a picture. Headmaster Alistair Finch, his arms slung around the shoulder of Marcus Thorne. They were both smiling, their faces beaming with the unassailable confidence of men who always win. They were standing in front of a newly constructed wing of the academy, a banner already hung above the door, bearing Thorne's name in large gold letters. Elias stared at the image. He saw the smug triumph in Thorne's eyes, the same look he had worn the day he told Elias the board had voted him out. He saw the sycophantic greed on Finch's face, the face of a man who would sell out any principle for a donation. And he saw the building, a monument to a lie, built with stolen money, its name a testament to the greatest betrayal of his life. Something inside him snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, seismic shift. The despair didn't vanish, but it was suddenly joined by something else. A cold, clear, and utterly ferocious rage. He had been so focused on his own pain, his own failure, that he had forgotten what this was really about. It wasn't just about him. It was about a world where men like Thorne and Finch could build monuments to their own corruption, while good people like Sarah fought for scraps, and innocent children like Lily were turned away at the door. He looked down at the torn drawing in his hand. Lily and Daddy's school. He had been trying to run from a ghost, but the ghost was now casting a shadow over his daughter's future. Running wouldn't save her. Hiding wouldn't protect her. The only way to protect her was to build her a world where men like Thorne didn't win. He stood up. He unzipped the duffel bag and began to unpack, his movements now filled with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. He put the clothes back in the drawer. He placed the books back on the shelf. He took a piece of tape and carefully mended the tear in Lily's drawing, placing it back on the wall, directly in his line of sight. Then he went to the back of his closet, to a garment bag he hadn't opened since the day he'd disappeared. Inside was a suit. It was a dark charcoal gray, custom-tailored, a relic of his former life. It was the armor of Elias Vance. He put it on. It was a little tight in the shoulders, a testament to years of a different kind of labor, but as he buttoned the jacket and straightened the tie, he felt a transformation. He was no longer Ben, the defeated handyman. He was no longer the cowering ghost. He looked in the small, cracked mirror on the back of the door, and for the first time in 5 years, he recognized the man staring back. The eyes were still tired, but they were no longer empty. They were filled with a cold, hard light. He picked up his phone and made a single call to a lawyer in another state, a man who owed him a life debt. "It's time," Elias said into the phone. "File the injunction, file the countersuit, and get the documents to the press. All of them." He hung up and walked out of the apartment, not looking back. He walked past the park, past the diner, past all the landmarks of his borrowed life. He walked toward Blackwood Academy. The dedication ceremony was already underway. The long drive was lined with expensive cars, a parade of wealth and power. He walked through the iron gates, the same gates he had been turned away from months ago, his heart a steady, cold drum in his chest. He saw a small group of protesters near the entrance, holding signs that said, "Fund public schools," and "Education is not a commodity." And at the front of the group, holding a sign with a fierce, determined look on her face, was Sarah. Their eyes met across the manicured lawn. He saw the shock, the confusion, and a flicker of something else in her expression as she took in the sight of him. This was not the broken man who had stumbled away from her last night. This was someone else, a stranger in a suit of armor, walking into the heart of the enemy's camp. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise. Then he turned and continued toward the source of the sound, toward the stage. He heard Finch's voice, amplified by a sound system, echoing across the lawn. A man of unparalleled vision and integrity, Marcus Thorne. Elias walked around the crowd of elegantly dressed guests, his path direct and unwavering. He reached the side of the temporary stage just as Thorne was stepping up to the microphone, a practiced, humble smile on his face. Security guards, seeing Elias's determined approach, moved to intercept him. "Sir, you can't be up here." Elias didn't even look at them. He projected an aura of absolute authority, the long-dormant muscle memory of a man who was used to being obeyed. "I'm an old friend of Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice low and even. "He'll want to hear what I have to say." For a crucial second, they hesitated, confused by his confidence and his expensive suit. It was all the time he needed. He stepped up onto the stage, walking directly toward the podium. Thorne saw him. The humble smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a flash of primal fear. The crowd murmured, confused by the interruption. Finch, standing at the side of the stage, looked annoyed. Elias reached the podium. He didn't grab the microphone. He simply stood next to Thorne, close enough that the mic would pick up his voice. "Hello, Marcus," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying across the silent lawn. Thorne's face was a mask of white. "Elias?" he whispered, the name a ghost on his lips. A gasp rippled through the older members of the crowd, the ones who had known him, who had read the stories, who had thought him dead or imprisoned. "My name is Elias Vance," he said, this time for everyone. He turned to face the audience, his gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned faces, finally landing on Sarah, who was standing at the edge of the crowd, her sign lowered, her eyes wide. "Headmaster Finch called Mr. Thorne a man of vision," Elias continued, his voice ringing with a power he hadn't wielded in years. "And he is. Marcus always had a vision for my company, my money, my life." He looked directly at Thorne, whose face was now slick with sweat. "You remember the plan, don't you, Marcus? The one we drew up on a napkin in that diner all those years ago? You were supposed to be the operational genius. I was supposed to be the architect. We were going to build something that lasted." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The cold, hard facts were more devastating than any shouted accusation. He began to lay it all out, a precise and damning narrative. He spoke of shell corporations, of falsified earnings reports, of backdated stock options. He used dates, account numbers, and the names of offshore banks. It was not a rant. It was a surgical dissection of a crime performed in public. "This building," Elias said, gesturing to the new wing, "is called the Thorne Arts Center. A fitting name, because it was funded by the art of the steel. The money Marcus so generously donated to this institution was laundered through a holding company in the Cayman Islands, the very same one he used to strip the assets from Titan Capital's pension fund." "Your pension fund," he added, looking at some of the older faces in the crowd who he knew had been investors. He then turned his attention to Finch, who looked like he was about to be sick. "And Headmaster Finch, a man of such high moral principle. I'm sure it was just a coincidence that a personal gift of $250,000 appeared in your private account the day after you agreed to put Thorne on your board. No questions asked." The crowd was in an uproar. Reporters, smelling the biggest story of the year, were already on their phones, filing reports. Thorne stood frozen, exposed, his legacy turning to ash before his eyes. Elias took a step back from the microphone, his work almost done. "5 years ago," he said, his voice now softer, more personal, "I lost everything I had built. I came to this town to hide, to forget. I believed that building things, that trusting people, was a fool's game. I was wrong." His eyes found Sarah's again. "I learned from a very wise teacher and a brilliant 7-year-old artist that the most important things you can build are not made of glass and steel. They are communities. They are libraries. They are opportunities for every child, not just the ones who can afford an endowment." He looked back at the stunned, silent audience. "As of 10 minutes ago, my lawyers filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Mr. Thorne and his associates. They also released a mountain of evidence to the SEC and the press. His vision is about to get a lot smaller. About 8 by 10 feet, I believe." A ripple of shocked laughter went through the crowd. "But this was never about revenge," Elias concluded. "This is about building something better. I am liquidating every remaining asset I have, and every dollar recovered from this lawsuit will be used to establish a new foundation. The Lily Vance Educational Foundation. Its first act will be to fully fund and build a new public library and community learning center for this town. A place with good bones. A place with a bright red door, open to everyone." He stepped away from the podium, leaving a scene of chaos in his wake. Finch was sputtering. Thorne was being surrounded by reporters shouting questions, and the wealthy patrons were looking at each other in horror and confusion. Elias walked off the stage, his shoulders straight, and didn't look back. He had faced his ghosts and banished them. He was no longer hiding. He walked through the stunned crowd, his eyes fixed on only one person. He walked right up to Sarah, who stood waiting for him, the protest sign forgotten at her feet. He had torn down an empire of lies. Now he had to see if he could rebuild a bridge. 1 year later, the autumn air was just as crisp, but it carried a different scent. It was the smell of fresh paint, new lumber, and possibility. Elias stood on the steps of the newly completed Northwood Public Library and Community Learning Center, a building of warm brick, gleaming glass, and inviting cedar. It did not have the cold, imposing grandeur of Blackwood Academy. Instead, it had a vibrant, welcoming energy that seemed to pull the whole community toward it. And just as he had promised, it had a bright red door. The past year had been a whirlwind. The downfall of Marcus Thorne and Alistair Finch was swift and total. The evidence Elias had meticulously gathered over his years in hiding was irrefutable. Thorne's financial empire crumbled under the weight of federal indictments and civil suits, and Finch was unceremoniously dismissed from a disgraced Blackwood, which was now desperately trying to repair its tarnished reputation. The news stories had been sensational for a time, painting Elias as a vengeful phantom emerging from the grave of high finance. But he had ignored them. He wasn't interested in tearing down. He was interested in building up. The Lily Vance Educational Foundation became his new life's work. He was not a CEO in a corner office, barking orders and watching stock tickers. He was the man on the ground, meeting with architects, negotiating with contractors, and working hand in hand with a board of directors made up not of financiers, but of teachers, librarians, and community leaders. The head of that board was Sarah Jenkins. Their reunion, in the chaotic aftermath of the Blackwood dedication, had been quiet and uncertain. He had walked up to her, stripped of all his armor, and simply said, "I'm sorry I lied to you." She had looked at him, the man she had known as Ben and the stranger who was Elias Vance, and had seen the truth that resided in the space between them. "You should have trusted me," she had said, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't even trust myself," he had admitted. "Can we start again? Hello, my name is Elias Vance. I'm helping to build a library." A slow smile had spread across her face. "Sarah Jenkins, I hear you have some experience." They had started again, not as a wounded man and a savior, but as partners. They rebuilt their relationship on a foundation of absolute honesty, brick by painful, glorious brick. They fell in love all over again, this time with no secrets, no hidden identities, just two people committed to building something good in the world. Today was the dedication of their first, and most important, project. The library was more than just a building. It was the physical manifestation of Lily's drawing, a promise fulfilled. The whole town was here, a vibrant cross-section of the community that had been brought together by this shared endeavor. Elias stood at the podium, but he was not the same man who had stood on that stage at Blackwood. The suit he wore was simpler. The confidence in his posture came not from power, but from peace. He kept his speech short. He thanked the community, the construction workers, the volunteers. He didn't mention Marcus Thorne or his own past. That story was over. This was the beginning of a new one. "A building is just a container," he said, his voice carrying over the happy crowd. "What matters is what it holds. And our hope is that this building will hold stories, dreams, and opportunities for generations to come. It's not my library, or the Foundation's library. It's your library." He then introduced the person who would cut the ribbon, not a politician or a wealthy donor, but a 7-year-old girl with bright brown eyes and a smile that could light up the world. Lily, holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors with both hands, looked up at him, her face beaming with pride. With a little help from Sarah, she snipped the red ribbon, and the crowd erupted in cheers. The bright red door was officially open. Later that afternoon, long after the crowds had dispersed and a quiet hush had fallen over the building, Elias, Sarah, and Lily sat in the children's section. The room was bathed in the warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun, streaming through the huge windows. The shelves were filled with brand new books, their spines uncracked, smelling of paper and ink and fresh starts. Lily, exhausted from her big day, had fallen asleep in his lap, her small head resting against his chest, her breathing soft and even. Elias looked around the room, at the colorful murals on the walls, the child-sized tables and chairs, the cozy reading nooks. He had built skyscrapers that touched the clouds, corporate headquarters that sprawled over acres, but none of them had ever felt as real, as solid, as this one room. He had never felt this sense of profound, unshakable peace in all his years of accumulating wealth and power. He felt a hand cover his. He looked up and met Sarah's gaze. Her eyes were full of a love and pride that still, after all this time, felt like a miracle to him. "You built it," she whispered, her voice full of emotion, "just like she drew it. Our school." He looked down at his sleeping daughter, the inspiration for it all. He looked at the woman beside him, the architect of his own redemption. He was no longer Elias Vance, the fallen titan, or Ben, the man in hiding. He was just a father and a partner, sitting in a library he had helped build, surrounded by everything that mattered. "We built it," he corrected her softly, a smile touching his lips. He tightened his grip on her hand, the simple, solid connection a far greater treasure than any fortune he had ever possessed. He was home. He was finally, truly home.